What's up, Warriors, and welcome to another episode of the Mental Health Movement Podcast, Voice for the Voiceless. I am your host, Chris. Before we get today's session started, I just wanted to say thank you so much for listening to these last couple episodes. Derek and Reese were both really good guests and had a lot of great feedback on Derek's story. Today's special guest we have is she is a therapist, a holistic healer, and a wellness coach, and has created a 5-module tool dedicated to empowering others for healing. Please help me introduce Jada. Jada, how you doing?
Hello. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me today. I really love talking about mental health and wellness, and anytime I get a chance to, I am on board. So thank you for creating a platform.
Yeah, absolutely. When I saw your content on Instagram, I'm like, oh man, I got to reach out to her. You put out some really good content. And I feel it's important to add to other people's platforms, regardless of how big or how small somebody is. It's always great to have that little extra reach somewhere. So thank you again.
Absolutely. And thank you for the comment. And before before I honestly, like 60 days ago, I had not that many followers, and I was putting out the same amount of content that I always have. And I'm speaking to mental health, and I was like, no one cares. I'm just going to close shop. Like, no one is listening. And then I kind of hit on a vein when I started talking about really a root cause of so many people's pain, and that is unhealed trauma. And when I started speaking to that, all of a sudden there was this outcry, and I've just really been overwhelmed with a number of people that have reached out and have said, I feel seen, I feel heard. Thank you for putting words to what I have been feeling. And I thought, wow, sometimes it's just a matter of saying the right combination of words that kind of opens up healing for someone. So anytime that we talk about mental health, especially, there's always been this stigma, right? And it's it's not something that we talk about openly. And a lot of people are afraid to share. So I honestly put a lot of my own healing work into my content to let people know, like, I've been there. Yes, I'm a therapist now. Yes, I'm a medically trained PA, but I've sat where you sit. I know what it is like to be on that side of the couch too.
Yeah, and something really important that you started out with, of it being an uphill battle, talking about mental health and putting out the same amount of content that you do every day or every week, however your schedule works. It's so hard to stay consistent when you feel like the message isn't getting out there. And like you said, the right amount of the combination of words is so important, because it's just like, okay, this clicks, this didn't. No matter how powerful it is to me, it might not resonate with this group of people or this group of people. When I started this journey in 2019, especially being a man, of course, not saying that women don't struggle sharing their story, but being a man, society has basically said that it's not normal for men to share their feelings and not normal to tell their stories the way that they do.
Right.
When I first started sharing my story, I posted it on a Facebook group that I was part of and talked about my attempts and everything else. And a lot of people were commenting on it. I'm like, I didn't know I needed to hear this. I didn't know I needed to read this. So it's great to see even someone of your caliber of professional aspect and just expertise on everything. It's great to see that you experience something that somebody like myself that doesn't have an educational background and is able to speak to all those things that people have been going through and create that platform for others to listen to.
Well, we all know pain,
Yeah.
and we all have been disappointed in our life. And what I really hope people talk more about and really have an understanding about is, you know, from a therapist standpoint, we used to view trauma as either big T trauma or little t trauma. And not to get too sciencey, but big T trauma was trauma that we would all recognize as, okay, that's traumatic, like war, fire, famine, like we can just look at the world and see big T trauma. But little T trauma are those disappointments that we have over and over and over again through the process of growing up. And just making it through childhood can be traumatic for most people, because that's when we really, um, our subconscious is basically driving the boat at that point. Our brains aren't fully developed. We don't know how to interpret, adults in our life who might be struggling with their own wounds and hurts and pains and traumas. And from a child's point of view, we have no other choice but to assume that we're at fault and we are somehow flawed. And so we take that "I'm not good enough" story that we created when we're children, and we carry that with us. And it's not until adulthood, and it's not often until something breaks us in adulthood that brings us to our knees that we start to look inward and go, well, how do I feel about myself, and how do I love me, and my goodness, why didn't someone ever teach me how to love myself? You can have great parents and a great childhood and still not know how to love you
Right.
in a way that honors your worth.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm 31 now, and I started seeking out therapy when I was 27, 28. I think that was after my second attempt. And, like you said, it takes levels of trial and error and something that destroys you as a person, and that childhood trauma to dump on top of whatever just broke you. For me, I grew up with divorced parents at a very young age. And all that childhood trauma just kind of sat there untreated for decades.
Mhm.
And it manifested all those negative feelings that I'm not good enough, and it manifested a lot of self-destruction and self-harm to myself. And the first therapist I had in Jersey was terrific. She was able to break the ice that was over my soul, and start digging into what I went through. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, I'd say fortunately, she got me to a point where I left New Jersey because of the environment I was surrounded by was not mentally healthy for me.
Mhm.
Um, and it took losing two really important people in my life when I came back down to Florida to seek therapy again. And here I am with this platform and having this conversation with you. Unfortunately, loss is something that teaches us something that even the hardest of life lessons can't teach us. Um, one of them being my brother, who was very essential to my journey of healing, and somebody who was very close to my heart, both of which my therapist has helped me get through. And it's awesome that you brought up the big T little T thing, because that was actually something my own therapist suggested that I covered on one of my podcasts. And it's incredible to hear that conversation again, because it's not something that's talked about enough. Because people just automatically assume that everything is the big T. You're heavily traumatized by everything that's going on in your life, when obviously trauma shouldn't be a competition as it is. But in the society of technology and constant information, it's kind of like people don't educate themselves enough on what they're going through.
For sure. And, you said something really beautiful, that your therapist broke through the ice over your soul, if I'm quoting you correctly.
Yeah.
Or and that's so beautiful, because that picture, that paints a picture for someone that is so very true, because we get frozen in our trauma and we can feel hopeless because of that. And a major part of depression isn't necessarily sadness and crying. It's this feeling of being frozen. It's this feeling of being stuck and feeling that it doesn't matter what you do, it's hopeless. And that's that's a beautiful analogy of what therapy and what healing can look like, is this thawing, it's this softening, it's this allowing of the beauty that is really love, to melt that hardness that we put around our heart. And you say frozen, which is so beautiful and so metaphorically accurate in so many ways, but also, I speak of in layers. And it's those layers of trauma that bury our heart, that harden our heart, whether it's frozen or just encased in this survival behaviors that people do to keep from, quote, getting hurt. But it actually prevents the most beautiful living of our lives, is through that soulful heart led space. But that's a hard thing to do when you've been hurt. And it's a natural tendency to want to protect that heart and to want to not let people in, because we've all experienced hurt, we've all experienced pain. That's a universal known. And how awesome that you're giving men especially a place, because it's interesting. I've noticed that in my own life. To your point, when people say, someone like me, meaning like I'm a professional, I help other people, but I'll never forget the day standing in my kitchen when a friend of mine came over and asked how I was, and I really wasn't doing okay. And I said, I'm not doing well, instead of the proverbial, I'm fine, which is an emotion anyway. But I didn't just keep wearing the mask of I'm okay. I actually said, I'm kind of falling apart. Um, and as soon as I did that, just like when you said on your Facebook group, like, I attempted, or I'm struggling, people were they take notice, they stop, they pause, and they say, me too. I
Yeah.
didn't know that you felt that way, because I have felt that way. And suddenly giving permission to experience and acknowledge our own pain gives permission for others to do the same. And that's when healing starts.
Absolutely. One of the very first stories I had written out, it took me about like 2 hours sitting in a gym parking lot, just got done with a workout, and I kind of blanked out writing it. I don't remember writing any of it, but when I went back to read it, it's just like, wow. When I had a conversation with my therapist about it, she basically titled it "Honoring My Inner Child," and like
Mhm.
you said about layers, shedding that toxic skin that you've been wearing for so long, and essentially removing the mask. Um, it's amazing to me how simple of a phrase "How are you?" can shake somebody's core, because it's just like we're so used to saying I'm fine or I'm okay. But when you're finally able to be vulnerable with somebody and trust them enough to do so, and then they realize like, wow, I didn't realize you felt that way, and you're seen, you're acknowledged, and you're heard. And so many people in this community, and I guess just the world in general, pretends every day on whether or not they're doing really good, or everything's great, but when you close those doors it might be a completely different story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna hit on something you said, because I'm an athlete. I've been a lifelong athlete, and I'm also like a personal trainer. So having exercise as a tool is so important. And I'm a big believer that trauma is stored in our body. And the pain that we need to release it through our body. And it's so interesting and yet so spot on that you wrote that letter right after you finished a workout. You were sitting in the parking lot, and there is something about movement that creates, I call it like this, it's like this double blessing. When we move our body, we allow movement of our emotions. And that big workout that you did created space for those emotions to actually exit your body. And one of the most recent studies about PTSD, which is post traumatic stress disorder, or I think most people know that acronym. Um, which is kind of a fallout of trauma, is actually weightlifting. So weightlifting is actually a very effective treatment tool for PTSD, and so it's fascinating and just really lends even more credence to when we move our body, we allow those emotions a way out. And then writing is also movement. You know, journaling is movement. It's movement of our hand, but it's still movement. And that movement creates the space for an exit
Right.
of those kind of stored up and trapped emotions that get stuck. And you know, you probably had like some stream of conscious writing, which is what I tell people to do, which is just you just write it, you don't stop, like you whatever you just let it all flow, and suddenly you get to the real core issue. And then when you go back and read it, you're often really surprised at the depth of your emotion.
Yeah, I think it was probably like 3, 4 paragraphs too. And I
Yeah.
remember posting it, and I was kind of afraid of the response because it was pretty graphic. And it was just about how my mom was making me feel and everything. And I think that was just right before I finally decided to cut her off. But yeah, like I said, right after the workout, it's people underestimate how powerful writing is.
Hmm.
I feel journaling is probably one of the best things that I've ever done in my life. And I've done it since I was like 14 years old before therapy. Of course, before digging into the actual healing aspect, it was just kind of like writing thoughts, which I guess essentially is a form of therapy, just not the plan of healing like actual therapy is. So when I was able to start therapy and channel all those emotions on a piece of paper, um, I remember calling it just, putting my demons on a piece of paper so they wouldn't just swirl around in my head.
Hmm.
And um, anytime that I've ever tried to help somebody who was going through a rough time, like, have you tried journaling? And you're like, oh, well, I don't have like a diary or anything. I'm like, it's not really a diary type thing. Like, you write things on a piece of paper and you read it back. It's like, wow, I didn't know I was feeling all this until it ended up on a piece of paper.
Absolutely. And it's I actually created a journal last year, and creating a place to go do that is awesome. But to that point, you can just go to Walgreens and get a composition book. And it's not, it doesn't have to be beautiful, and it doesn't even have to be something that you keep. A lot of people struggle with being that authentic and that real on paper for fear that someone's going to come by and see it.
Right.
So I tell people, you know what? Burn it. Like if you write it, get it out of you. The process of writing is cathartic. And and you know, you can always just ceremonially like light it on fire and send it away. You don't have to fear not being real for fearing someone's going to see it. But you also brought up a really important point, which is the whole reason I started my online wellness, Soul via Soul, which is to empower people to take healing into their own hands. And even though I'm a therapist, yes, and I help people do this in my real life job, yes. But with Soul via Soul, with my online wellness, it's really to give people tools and information so that they can do this work and be witness to their own trauma themselves. It's awesome when we have a therapist. Some people don't have that. Some people are afraid of that. Some people can't afford that even. And you know, the thing is we are not victims. We may have all had a lot of really awful things happen to us. And not to discount the trauma that some people have gone through, but to understand that we all have the power to change and rewrite, talking about journaling, our own story anytime we want. We have that power, and we can be a self directed healer. We can take that onto ourselves and do the work for ourselves.
Right. And the most important part of that is doing the work. I feel like most people, when it comes to healing or, when they approach therapy, they think of therapy as just a 1 hour session of just venting.
Right.
Um, one of my good friends, when she was going into therapy, I told her how I approach my therapy, and that's I write down positives of, the month that I saw her last, and the negatives. And I always get out the negatives first, and how I want to address those said negative things. And she's like, "Oh, I never thought of it that way. I usually just tell them how my day went." I'm like, "You can do that if it helps you, but in the long run, you gotta get to the bottom of why you're still feeling like this every session." Um,
Correct. And
and oh, go ahead.
just to add to that, like, and I tell people too, like, if you're starting a relationship with with a therapist, you're paying that person, so you also want to put out your goals. Like, what do you want to achieve? You have to be, as a therapist, there's kind of a rule: you never work as hard as your client, because it's not your journey, it's their journey. And you have to meet them halfway. You come here, but then they have to come the other half
Right,
of the road.
right.
There's work to be done.
Absolutely. And I feel accountability is another really big one too when it comes to healing. And I just feel in today's society that's a really big thing that a lot of people are missing is accountability. And I'm very guilty of not taking accountability in a lot of things that I try to change in my life, but I'm aware of the accountability issues. I'm aware of what I need to do to get to from A to B or B to C. And most people starting out in therapy, again, like I said, it's not just how was your day, it's how can I help you heal from you're feeling like this all the time. Because if you're going into therapy and the same issue is just coming up every single conversation, then at some point you just got to be, well, how do I change this from being a constant conversation? um
Right. And to speak to that, not all healing is going to be accomplished through conversation.
right.
That's where, especially the unbecoming program that I created is more about understanding that we have to get in the body.
Yeah.
And there are certain things that you can say and discuss and have dialogue on, but then there are certain things that are going to help move those emotions through you way quicker, way faster. And that is using the body as an instrument, as a tool. Just simple things like breathing can help connect you to your emotions on a deeper level. And that accountability, it's self-love is discipline. And
Mhm.
when you're trying to learn how to unravel and heal and start that inward journey, you have to have discipline,
Right.
because you got to be willing to show up for yourself. It's not it's hard, because it's hard when someone starts a healing journey. You basically are saying, okay, ready, this is going to hurt, here we go.
Right.
And like, who wants that? Who wants to say, I'm up for pain? Where's the pain vending machine? I'm
Right.
so in. Nobody. It's so
Right.
hard to convince somebody to do it when initially it's not super attractive.
Yeah.
It's hard to speak to what it's going to be like on the other side, unless you've gotten to the other side and you really have now created a lovely life with beautiful, healthy, loving relationships, and you're at peace and you feel this deep sense of joy and passion in your life. That's what's on the other side.
Right.
But it's really hard to tell someone, okay, jump off this cliff, it's going to be great.
You're not wrong.
It's not an easy sell.
One of the hardest things for me was looking myself in the mirror and saying that I love you.
Yeah.
And that self-love is probably the hardest thing I've ever attempted to do. I've never openly said that I love myself or that I appreciate how much strength I can give off, or any of the light that I shed to other people. It's hard to put yourself up there with everybody else that you hold to a high standard. Um, and I think the best analogy to healing is basically trying to punch through a brick wall. Eventually, you're bleeding, your knuckles are bleeding, you're hurting yourself over and over again, but eventually it stops hurting and you get through that wall. And like you said, you don't know what's on the other side until you're trying to drive through it.
Yeah,
And I feel most human beings, if not all, don't learn from anything if they're sitting on top of a mountain. You got to start at rock bottom and build your foundation there. Because if you're building your healing journey based on things that make you temporarily happy, then eventually that rock bottom is going to give out every single time, because, addiction is something that a lot of people lean on to heal. Um,
absolutely.
and it's not talked about nearly enough when it comes to starting that healing journey. Is you got to make sure that your foundation is sturdy. Surround yourself with positive influences and be grateful that you're waking up tomorrow. And there's so many little pieces that go into just beginning the healing journey.
I could not agree more. And it's, and to speak to addiction just for a little bit, addictions are so very common. And by and large, people will seek substances, or there's process addictions and images and all sorts of other addictions, a very broad category. But generally we're trying to feel or not feel something. We want to feel more of something or less of something, and so we pick up a substance that will deliver that. And they do, which is why they're addictive,
Right.
is because they temporarily take us away from either feeling less or feeling more of something.
Right.
And it's the process of deeply feeling that is often so scary for people. And so we don't want to feel those deep hurts, those deep pains, those look in the mirror and not like who you see. Like, we don't want that. So we'll do whatever we can to not feel that. And it isn't until we, at your point too, like, we don't learn anything at when life's going well. I call it the fertile darkness. And I'm a big gardener. And if you do any of my social stuff, doing I'm always in the garden. I have a wheelbarrow or a spade, or I'm digging in the dirt, or I'm growing, talking about the importance of nutrition for mental health, which is also super important. And I talk about that a lot, because there's just a lot you can change with your diet that actually improves your mental health. But I'm getting sidetracked. But I call it the fertile darkness, which is, you don't put a seed out in the sunlight and go, grow, little seed.
Right.
You tuck it into the darkness where it's dark and scary, and there's no light, and that's where we grow roots. That's where we break out of limiting beliefs. That's where we start to reach for the sun and reach for the positive and the beautiful things. But that doesn't happen at the top. That happens at the bottom. That happens in the scary, quiet, dark corners of our heart and our mind and in our life, where we are struggling to find that connection with ourselves. And really, the journey of healing is a journey back to you.
Yeah.
It's just remembering that you're divine to your core. We just forgot it along the way. And it's a process of unthawing and removing the layers that brings us back home. It brings us back to what we always were, but just forgot through the process of adulting.
And you mentioning fertile darkness, I'm a really big movie guy, so I immediately think of Bug's Life. If you remember the scene of a flick showing the rock to the little princess, saying this rock is eventually going to become a tree, because she was feeling unworthy and small because she's smaller than everybody else. And he's like, eventually all the rain, all the sunshine is going to make this turn into that giant tree you see there.
Yeah.
And like you said, you got to be in the darkness before you start seeing the light. And if you're born into the light, if you're born into being on top and never having to struggle, sure, you're fortunate, but you're not learning anything. You're not being given the trial and error side of life. Because I mean, speaking from myself, who has done nothing but fail a lot, it's given me a lot of lessons to be at the point that I'm at. But that came with really hard work and a lot of accountability.
Yeah.
So I really like that. I really like that seed analogy because I feel I feel like everybody can relate to that.
Yeah. And you can't grow what you don't plant. And that's
Right.
the other thing is like people are, you want to look around and look at this, we want to jumpstart healing. We want to just get to the other side. We want to just be like, okay, poof, I'm there, or I'm going to take this whatever and I'm going to just magically transport into this life of beauty. Well, it doesn't work that way. And if we don't plant the seeds, if we don't do the work and till and water and nourish and take out the weeds every once in a while and prune all the dead stuff that doesn't help the plant grow, like all of it is this process of constantly growing that garden, but we have to plant it, and I think sometimes we want to just not plant. We just want to harvest. That's not how it works. And
Absolutely.
and it's hard sometimes to see the trials that we're in and the struggles that we have as being blessings in any way or lessons. Like it's really easy to look around and go, woe is me, or my life sucks, or why did this happen to me? But those don't help us move out of that space. And everyone's got stuff and we're all works in progress. And I think when we get to the place of understanding that, I mean, my point of view is that all the hardships in my life have brought the greatest blessings, have brought the greatest learning. And I wouldn't have gotten there had I not been at the bottom at different points in my life and reached for the sunlight and planted myself and rooted myself in truth and did the work of going inward and clearing out the things that just simply do not align with me anymore and do not serve me.
Right. One of the most powerful quotes that I've heard from a guest that I had on here, maybe about 5, 6 episodes ago. And it said, "Life doesn't happen to me; it happens for me."
Hmm.
And after she told me that, it's like everything started making a lot more sense because
Yeah,
whether it's a failed relationship with a parent or something at work happens, it's not happening to me; it's happening for me. And there's
absolutely.
always a plan in the universe for something.
And I'm a believer that I like to use the phrase, one of my mantras is I am open to receive that the universe is always working out for me.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that everything that is for my highest good is being brought to me. And I truly believe that, which if we can really grab hold of that, will really, to me, helps people who struggle with anxiety. There's this constant fear of the future
Hmm.
generally, and the fear of the fear. And if we can relax into just knowing that truly everything that's going to happen for us and to us is going to bring us to our highest version of ourselves, even if we cannot see in that moment that it is, to just trust and surrender, there's a great deal of peace that can come with that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So let's shift gears a little bit and kind of dig into your journey. So where does this journey begin for you and what made you want to become a therapist?
Well, you know, if I think back, I wanted to be a therapist when I was in high school. And my dad, who was a teacher, um, kind of poo-pooed it. And in part, I think because generationally, that generation and the generation before him did not talk about mental health, didn't believe in mental health, and thought that it was kind of, woo-woo or witchcraft or something like. And if things were wrong with you, you certainly didn't talk about it. You did not air your dirty laundry. You just kept that nice tucked inside, and no one talked about the white elephant in the room. And people used to be just institutionalized. There was no concern or compassion about mental illness. Like that just did not exist. So I actually wanted to be a therapist way back when, and it was poo pooed. And I thought, okay, fine, I'll switch gears. What's more socially acceptable? What's going to get the blessing
Right.
of my parents? And, but I grew up, my parents were divorced. And so, I understand that struggle with divorced kids. And, I lived that too. And I originally wanted to be a doctor when I went to college. I thought, well, I'll just switch gears. I love biology. I was a biology major, chemistry minor, and I loved the sciences, the hard sciences, very, very fascinated by all that. But I always had this bend of psychology too. And I loved the art of things and the mystery of behavior, not just the science behind it. But I pursued and became I ended up not becoming an MD, and I decided to take a year off after I graduated from college. And instead of going right to medical school, I actually volunteered and shadowed a PA. And I thought, oh my gosh, I had never heard of a PA before. I don't actually want to be an MD. I want to be a PA, because in my mind, I always wanted to be a full-time mom at some point in my life. And I couldn't see how I could do both. Now, a lot of female MDs do both, and they do it very well. But for me, that just, couldn't get my head around it. So I ended up going to become a PA, and I worked in family practice for a long time. And it was interesting because when I was working in family practice, probably a fourth of the patients that came in to see me for a mental health issue. They would show up on my schedule as sore throat, and I would walk into the room and I would be like, okay, well, let's look at all the bacteria or the viruses that could be causing your sore throat. And then suddenly tears would roll down their face. And the reason they have a sore throat is because they've been crying for 2 weeks. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not equipped to handle this. I don't know what to do with this person. And I always felt ill equipped. And I felt so bad for the people that came in to their doctor for mental health issues, because people were so afraid to admit or even go see a therapist or go see a psychiatrist, or, that meant you were really messed up, which is crazy. But that's how we thought. And I think that's still, a lot of people think that way. You go to your family doctor or your primary care and say, I've got this issue. And then you dig a little deeper, and maybe it's not really irritable bowel, but maybe it's depression. Or, you've got a heart murmur. Well, it's actually because you're stressed out all the time. Like there was this disconnect that I saw, and there was not this handling of both. I was told just to refer all those people out, and I couldn't help them. And so that was the first time I thought, this is backwards. Like, why can't I help this person? This person has come to me, and now I have to just give them the name of a therapist and send them on their way. I feel like I didn't even do my job.
Right.
And so after that, I did become a full-time mom for 15 years. I homeschooled my children and did the whole mom thing until my life fell apart. And suddenly I found myself looking down the barrel of divorce. And I thought, how in the hell did I get here? How did that happen? How did that happen? And I was so afraid of that word. I actually couldn't even say it. I actually couldn't pronounce the word. I was so terrified of being a divorced woman. That just didn't align with any part of me at all. And so I started therapy. I started therapy at that time to try to figure out why I was so unhappy and angry. And it was through that process that my therapist, after years of being in therapy, said to me, you have to do this. You have to do this. You have a natural gift. You have to do this. And I thought, well, here we are, full circle. I wanted to do this when I was 16. And now I'm in my mid-30s, but sure, let's do it now. And so I actually went back to school and got my master's as a therapist. And when I graduated, then it was I thought I would go back into family practice, and I would go and kind of wear both hats. Where if someone came in with a sore throat, awesome. Is it due to a bacteria, or do we have some depression? Like, what's going on? But instead I switched gears and went straight into psychiatry. And so That's what I do now. I practice, my PA allows me to do medication management if that's what someone needs and wants. But then the therapy hat also allows me to really dig into a little bit more of their journey and their story, and to use that training as a tool. And again, because I've done the work, I've had lots of different trauma therapies on me. I've had EMDR, I've had rapid resolution therapy, I've had talk therapy, I've had somatic techniques, like I've done them. And so, having done them in my own life, I feel so passionate about helping other people learn how to do that too. So, it was really when COVID started that I got the whole idea of doing online wellness. And that really was because so many people were struggling, and there was not enough resources. And my license limits me to practice in the state that I live in, but if I moved into wellness online, I could help anybody anywhere. And I thought, well, that's what I got to do then, because I can give people tools, I can give people information, I can tell people, the supplements that might help them. I can give them a plan on how to pull themselves out, because so many people needed services and there were just simply not enough people to help.
Right.
So that's kind of how I got, to where I am now. But it really was this passion to just help as many people as I could with simple tools and practices that I know helped me, that could move the dial for someone in their own life.
Yeah. So there's something that you had said in there about the many hats that you wear, the psychiatry aspect and the psychologist aspect. I love that you said if somebody wants to do the medication thing, not that you would push it or push it on them or anything. And that's one thing, very heavy conversation I have with a lot of my guests is, how do you feel about medication, or does the medication work? And I had an experience before the therapist I have now, who she didn't write anything down. She didn't listen to really anything I was going through. And I had my first really bad anxiety attack with her. First thing that she says in our second session, I'm in the middle of an anxiety attack, and she cuts me off mid sentence and says that that's all the time that we have. And then she's like, "Would you be open to having taking this medication?" And I told her, I said, "I just need somebody to listen. Like, I don't want to take medication, because I just I see how it affects other people, and obviously it might not have the same effect on me, but I don't want medication."
Mhm.
And it turned me off from therapy for at least a year before I found the therapist that I have now. Um, I love more than anything that you're as passionate as you are about therapy, because I feel there are a lot of therapists who are very passionate about their job, but there's also that black cloud over therapy of the therapists that do it for the money or do it for however many patients they can prescribe medicine to. So it's refreshing to hear just that statement that I offer medication if they want it, because not enough people say that.
Well, it's a tool, and to me, we use the tools in our tool belt for different things. You don't always need a hammer. You don't always need a saw. Sometimes you need, a chisel. And
Right.
so, the thing is that it's a tool, and it is something that some of my patients take, and I'm happy to help them provide that tool. But no one comes into my practice and into my world without me talking about nutrition, exercise, self-love practices, breathing techniques, simple, just open ear and open heart on what's going on in your life. Like, it's this whole person approach. And sometimes we need more vitamin D, and all we need to do is take more vitamin D, and it's going to elevate our mood. A little magnesium at night goes a long way to helping with racing thoughts. There's just a lot of things that our bodies can do if they're given adequate tools. And nutrition is a tool. Sometimes Prozac is a tool. Sometimes magnesium is a tool, or sometimes lifting heavy weights is a tool. It's all connected. And even when someone comes to see me, like in my private practice, and say we're on medication, it's always an open discussion of, do I still need this particular tool? Maybe you don't. And if you don't, let's get rid of it. And sometimes we need crutches when we have some broken part of ourselves. But then when that part heals, we don't need the crutches anymore. So, it's just a matter of seeing and using all the resources that we need for the time that we need them. And then when we don't, as we do more of our work, we maybe can loosen our need on some of those other resources. But I don't poo-poo it because I prescribe medicine, but it's not something that not everyone benefits from, and not everyone sees great results from, and everyone's unique. So, it's hard to put a blanket statement for all medications are bad. They're not. They're tools, but they have to be put in the same light, in my opinion, as exercise and nutrition and sleep and self-love. They're all equal.
Absolutely. And I love the crutch analogy too, because people that take medication sometimes will use it as a crutch and not put in the extra work that might be needed, like like you said, the exercise or the therapy sessions that go along with that medication. Like antidepressants, for instance, like you might not need them for the rest of your life, and maybe like a year or two of therapy, and you can lighten the load on the antidepressants, and or just stop taking them eventually. And I feel there, like I said earlier, there are a lot of unfortunate therapists that will just, keep it on those people and, not push them to do more like you do. And like you said, it doesn't have to be that crutch forever. The broken part of us, I love that. And now I can't love that more than I do hearing it the first time.
Yeah, well, and a lot of people, speaking to that crutch and brokenness, a lot of people feel so much shame around asking for help.
Hmm.
And we don't have this. Nobody would be shamed if you walked into a clinic and said, I have, I dropped this 50-pound boulder on my foot and broke my toe. Someone would go, oh, well, let's patch you up, and let's, maybe you need a brace, and maybe you need some crutches, and maybe you need all these things. People go, you would tell someone, you should go get that fit. You should go someone needs to look at that. I think you broke your toe. You need to go to the doctor.
Right.
But we don't do that with mental health. We can feel broken inside, and not give ourselves the same amount of grace that we would with a broken toe or a broken arm. Like it's visible to others, there's a broken bone, you need to go have that fixed. But when we say we feel like we have a broken heart or a broken part of ourselves, that's not held with the same care. But we also don't give ourselves that same permission to rank it as equal to a broken toe or a broken arm. If we have a broken heart or a broken soul or a broken spirit, why don't we go get that taken care of?
I remember when I first started breaking that cycle of not going to the doctor unless I needed to, because I would live with my dad for a little while, and he always had that mentality of, oh, I'm not going to go to the doctors unless I absolutely need to.
Yeah,
And I started going for regular checkups finally, and this took 20 something years for me to break a cycle, because it's hard breaking those generational cycles.
it is.
And I remember putting, doing all the paperwork and everything, and it asked if I needed therapy, and it threw me off because there are some clinics that will put that on there, and the doctor asked me, "Oh, I saw that you have depression. Do you need resources for a therapist?" And I just kind of looked at her like, "I actually have a therapist," but it was nice to be asked that, because it caught me off guard.
That's new. We didn't used to ask that.
Right.
That's new. So, you know, that's one thing that I think I'm seeing a change, is that now if you go to see your primary care, often they will address mental health, but that has not been how it's been,
Right.
for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And the generational cycle is absolutely hard, especially if we're hardwired. Our parents, especially, and being a guy, don't show your emotions, suck it up, rub some dirt on it, get back out there. I mean, that was kind of how I grew up. If you had a bruise, it would be like, what are you crying about? Keep going.
Right.
And so, especially, you know, the generational cycle, yes, is hard, but also, to your point, being a guy and saying, you know what, I'm going to invest in my own health and well-being preemptively. I'm going to be proactive about making sure I'm in good health. And unfortunately, I lost my dad because of that stoic, I'm not going to ever to see the doctor. And he ended up having skin cancer that was, had he gone, they would have caught it. It's, you don't get an award for ignoring your body and your needs.
Right.
There's not some gold medal on the end of that, like, um so how awesome that you are not only doing it, but you're advocating for other people to be proactive about this. And I think that's the biggest, also, like, one of my other messages with Sylvia Soul is to be proactive, to be the one that breaks that generational cycle, to be the person that says it stops with me. And that, what's really powerful about that is when we take that initiative, like your analogy, breaking through the brick wall. Yeah, no one wants to step up to do that because it looks hard. Um, and not knowing what's on the other side. But if you actually invest in you, if you prioritize you, then what you can do is not only break that generational cycle for the people behind you, you break it for the people you will never meet. The
Right.
work you do now will impact generations ahead of you that you will never meet. That's powerful. That's worth picking up the sledgehammer and saying, okay, fine, give me that brick wall. We're going in. It stops with me.
Exactly. And there was a lot of those cycles created on from both of my parents. Like, my mom, she just had a lot of instability and just a lot of relationships growing up. And fast forward to me, I don't settle on relationships. I don't settle on the first person that I meet. And obviously 2023 being the way that it is, and it's, the dating world is hard as it is.
Yeah.
I have that conversation with my therapist sometimes. It's like, yeah, it sucks not being in a relationship, but I would much rather not be in a relationship than to look for the next person that will be there for possibly 6 months because I decided to settle.
And
Or
to be even, and I'll give you a sneak peek because I'm actually creating another program on this in the new year, and this speaks exactly to that. And here's what I want young people to hear: if you're not in a relationship yet, um the mental health at which you are is the level of mental health you will attract. And if you just sit on that for a hot second, you're like, wait a second, if I want healthy love mirrored back to me, if I want to attract someone who's going to love me all the way to my bones and know how to love me and hold me with the most sincere care that I could ever imagine or want or hope for, you have to be that person first.
right,
And that is what, I don't know that a lot of young people, maybe young people know this. I don't know. I all of my children are young adults right now, and none of them have relationships really. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing,
right,
because this is the time that you need to be selfish. This is the time you need to invest in you. This is the time that more than any other time. Don't wait till you're in your 30s and early 40s or 50s like I am. Do the work now.
Right.
Like, go ahead and make yourself an investment, make yourself a priority, because if you do the work now, chances are you're not going to have the divorce that you and I grew up with. You're not going to have the broken relationships. You're not going to have the cycles of trauma that are going to be passed down to your children. Like, do the work now.
Right.
It's never a good time to do hard things. It's never going to feel easier. It doesn't get easier if you wait. It's just a matter of waking up and saying, I matter. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to invest in me to get myself up here. Because what I want in my life is over here. I want
Yeah.
to attract that.
Right.
But we don't attract it by ignoring ourselves. We attract it by investing fully in ourselves so that we know our worth.
Agreed.
So that when someone comes along, Chris, who's worthy of you, you're going to know it.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. I think the hardest thing is staying selfish for yourself. Because growing up in the part of my language, but shit show of a family that I grew up in, it's hard to stay the opposite of that, being selfless for everybody else and making sure that you're putting your friends on a really high pedestal and then feeling every ounce of hurt, tenfold. But like you said, when you start investing in yourself and your mental health and your physical health and everything else, you attract what you are mentally and, in some cases physically too, because if you're self-destructing, nobody wants to be around somebody who's always negative or, is their own worst enemy and has no self-control over taking care of themselves. So yeah, it sucks. Being 31, I used to feel ashamed saying this out loud, but I'm not ashamed to say it anymore after I kind of talked to my therapist about it. But I've never had a relationship in my whole adult life. And sometimes when go on those dating apps and you share that with some people, it's like, yeah, I've never experienced XYZ, and those are for personal reasons. I don't want to settle on anything. Some people should just be like, oh, well, you don't have relationship experience. It's a red flag or whatever. But I fully agree on being selfish and, taking care of you, because at the end of the day, you matter just as much as anybody else.
Yeah. And how awesome that you know that at the age of 33 or 31, ever how old you are. I think you're 31.
31. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know that at 31. My life was falling apart in my mid 30s because I didn't know how to love me. And, that's a hard thing to say. I was a mom of 4 kids and I didn't know how to love me. That almost doesn't even make sense. Like, how can that be? But I didn't know how to love me in a way that I truly deserved and desired to be loved. And that's because I just didn't have the relationship with myself. Because of unhealed parts of me that I needed to heal, but I didn't know that. And that's the thing too, is like, we talk about healing, but it's not obvious to people that that's what needs to be done. What'll be obvious is that they have broken relationships, or you have chronic health issues, or you have, you're angry all the time, or you are struggling with keeping a job, or there's so many outward signs that could signal that someone needs to, or you're constantly attracting like abusive people in your life. Like, there are so many markers of unhealed trauma that manifest in our lives, but we don't put 2 and 2 together and say, oh, the reason I keep attracting, these awful, emotionally unavailable, abusive people in my life is because I have work to do on myself. That's the disconnect. We don't recognize that, constant irritable bowel and sleepless nights could be due to unhealed trauma. We are looking for the next, irritable bowel medical treatment.
Yeah.
Like there's a disconnect on understanding that if there's a lot of unhappiness in your current life, if you are unfulfilled and you feel stuck and you are just filled with a lot of anger, a lot of people, or resentment, or you just feel hopeless, it it may actually be because you have trauma to unpack.
Yeah, absolutely. You had brought it up a little bit earlier, but I'm definitely curious to hear more about it. What was the inspiration behind Soul via Soul?
So, interestingly enough, when I was in um school to be a therapist, we had to create a like ideal company, and we had to present it to the class. And because I was an athlete and because I also had the medical background, which is kind of unique for all the people that I was in therapy school with, I always wanted to bring this body awareness, medical, biological piece to psychology, because to me they were intermixed. Like there was a biology to the psychology. It wasn't just, we're not just talking about thoughts and our brain and our mind. Like we have to include the body too. Like it's all together.
Right.
And so I was always very intrigued about combining them and seeing psychology through the lens of biology. And so I had to create this makeshift uh, company. And so I called it Soul to Soul. And it was exactly how I have it now. And it was the idea that the soles of our feet represent our biology, they represent our physical body. And that it is through our physical body that we will actually find our SOUL, the essence of who we are, our soul. That buried within our bodies is actually our soul. And that we just can't get to this healing aspect without recognizing and understanding that it's going to come housed in our body.
Right.
So via, I ended up changing from soul to soul. Number one, because soul to soul was already taken, but via actually means through. It means the way. And I thought, well, that's even more perfect because via is the way through, but the body is the way that we will find our truest essence. And it is through the things we eat, how we move our body, how we love our body, understanding that this is our temple, this is our vessel. And it's through that that we find our heartful, soulful selves.
I love that. That's powerful. I love that it came through a basic, I guess, like a homework assignment, essentially.
It
um,
was. And then, like a decade later, when I had to create it, I'm like, wait a second. I already know. I created this back in school. I know exactly what I want to do. I want to bring the biology to psychology because it's all connected. And I just didn't hear or see anyone talking about it at the time. Like it just made so much sense to me that it had to be united.
right.
Um, so that's and I just love the image of a tree and our soles of our feet, like the roots, into the earth, and then our branches, we reach up to the sky, kind of like that seed
Yeah.
analogy too. So it just made sense. So that's
When did you create it?
2020.
Oh
Um,
wow. Okay.
so that's when I created it and didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I created it to basically answer and provide education and tools for people um, outside of the state that I practiced in, like more of that coaching aspect, which
Right.
you can do, anywhere, to provide like psychoeducation so people could move the dial in their life. So it was really on the heels of the pandemic and when all that happened, that I felt this calling that I had to create a platform, a space, a way, information, tools that, people could take the education and training that I have. And even though you're not like a patient, I can still give tools and resources to help someone help themselves.
Right. And I was gonna say what a time to create that too, right before the pandemic. What a time that was just for all of us in the mental health struggles that we were all having during that time. So to be able to create something that powerful and to add that many tools into it, I'm sure helped a lot of people.
Well, I certainly hope so. And, so much of the resources that I do are free. Like I have a podcast like you do. And, I love giving resources. I have a monthly prescriptions newsletter that's free that gives people tools and things like that. Obviously, I have courses and I have a journal. And so I have resources and tools, but it was really just this idea that um, I really wanted to have the conversation about mental health and to have it not be this redheaded stepsister that no one wants to talk about, but that it's equal to physical health and wellness. And not only is it equal to, it has to be linked arm in arm with, and to really just see that unification. And when COVID happened, suddenly I was doing therapy like this, like telehealth did not really exist. And that opened up this whole new world. And I at first was very resistant because I like seeing people in person, but then I saw the fact that there were people that could get resources and tools that never would do that because they were terrified to come in to see me, but they were okay with a screen. And so I thought, well, this is actually kind of really awesome that people who otherwise wouldn't get services are now getting services because of the fear of just coming in. So that kind of made me think, well, this can go much bigger because if I could do coaching with someone virtually anywhere in the world, how is that not just as powerful
Right.
and potentially just as healing?
Yeah.
So it really just, like, COVID did for a lot of people, of course, it's tragic in every way. And it also created opportunities and growth. And I think this is one of the potential good things is that it allows us to talk about mental health and it gives a platform for more people to get healing and services.
I couldn't agree more. I was very against the telehealth thing too, because I'm a face to face person as well. My therapist made that journey very easy for me during COVID because I was terrified to do it over a Zoom call. It's like, well, you don't know if the emotion's gonna be there. You don't know if they're just like on their phone listening to you and just writing down stuff or something. And she made that transition so easy for me. And it was one of those things that, like you said, it wasn't around very long before the pandemic, and people rarely used it. But then when we went into COVID, we got forced to,
Right.
and that created so many platforms, so many ways to help other people. And you had mentioned it earlier. That was funny enough. That was kind of the next thing I was going to ask you is what inspired the podcast? Because I know there was that wave of podcasts that came in during the pandemic. Everybody was kind of doing podcasts and everything. And for me, my inspiration behind the podcast was when my brother passed away. He was really heavy on my mental health journey and the Facebook group and everything that I had created. So genuinely curious, what inspired you to do the podcast, and I guess what is your goal for your podcast?
So the podcast actually dropped in as an idea. I have a marketing manager and she's a friend of mine who started her own company right when I had started Soul Via Soul. And she was a young, um, young girl just starting out. And I said, well, you can help me. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know social media. I didn't know what a TikTok was. I didn't know anything about Instagram. I still don't really. It was really very foreign to me, all the tech stuff. And I didn't have a website. I didn't have any of that stuff. And she said, well, I can help you do all that. I can help you like reach more people. That's your goal, right? I'm like, yes, that's my goal. And so it was her suggestion. She said, you could probably reach even more people if you do a podcast. And I was like, well, what is that? Um, because I didn't even listen to podcasts. So then I started listening to podcasts, and then I was like, oh, I love those. Um, and part of what made me want to do it was, number one, it allowed me to reach more people, which is the whole freaking goal of this whole mission. But number two, it allowed people to listen a little bit more and get familiar with me, because you can only like read someone's Instagram stories or go to their website. You get a feel for somebody. But I think that what I really love about podcasts is I feel like I get to know that person. I feel like when I listen to their voice, or I listen to their story, and I listen to the way they talk about something, I go, oh yeah, okay, that resonates. That actually helped me. Just listening to that brought some level of peace. I look at life differently because I listened to that piece of that podcast. I learned something. So I started seeing this as an even more impactful way to have someone listen to the podcast and walk away with an actionable step. So it's just another free resource that I could put out into the world and say, hey, we're going to talk about this. And when someone listens to it and then they get to the end and they're like, I feel better. Or, wow, like I didn't know that was the reason I felt this way. And I'm going to go do this thing now. She challenged me to exercise every day. I'm going to go do that. So I just saw it as an even bigger, more personal way to communicate the message of helping you learn how to heal in different aspects of your life.
Absolutely. For me, my favorite thing about the podcast that I started was all the different guests and all the different perspectives that I've had on here. Because when I first started recording, it was more just me doing informational podcasts, and there's a lot of information on the internet, and a lot of it just sits on websites that some people aren't aware of. And that was what I was doing for the longest time, was just basically getting information off of websites, and telling my own story about whatever subject I'll be talking about. And one of the first guests that I had on there, she's a de-escalation like counselor. She helps police force with the de-escalating when it comes to people that are in crisis. And when that podcast came out, and people were like, wow, she was a really good guest, and there's a lot of really good information that she said on there, it inspired me to start networking. And I think that's arguably one of the most powerful things people like yourself and me, like yourself and I, can do, is networking and meeting those different people and having them on the podcast to hear different perspectives. Because I learned stuff from you so far in this podcast that we've done so far, and I would like to think that I've given you some new perspectives in any conversation that we've had so far. um, I've also had listeners message me on Facebook and be like, hey, I just want to let you know that I carry a notebook with me every time I listen to your podcast now. And
Wow,
stuff like that is powerful.
that is powerful. Look at you. You know what? And that's what I think is awesome. I really, my podcast is relatively new. I don't even know how many episodes I have, but it's only been a few months. And I tend to I need to do more of what you're doing. I need to do more networking. I need to do more of getting out there, because, it is that shared community of,
All right, there we go. Welcome back.
Love technology.
Me too. It's the best. So I know you were talking about the networking and everything of your podcast. There we
Uh,
go. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
It
Uh,
says I have network. It says I have, um, it says my network, it says my internet is unstable.
yeah, it's red for me right now. It's yellow. All right, let's try to keep going as long as it lets us. So I know you were talking about networking with your podcast and everything, and if you want to go ahead and resume that.
Sure. And I think that the more we can network like this and have like-minded individuals keep spreading this message of hope and healing, and here's tools and here's resources and here's people, here's other options, the more we do that, the more we are going to not only heal ourselves, but heal globally. Like there's you make one movement personally, but that, again, we already discussed, it impacts that family system, which impacts, it's like a ripple and it just goes outward. It impacts the family and then generations and then the community, and then like it doesn't stop. It's love is a powerful thing, and if you're coming from that place of love, if you're coming from that place of inspiration and healing and hope, I just can't help but think that that's going to win. I'm naive in that regard, but I just really feel like the more people do this kind of thing and network and use each other's tools and resources, the more we can help just overall.
I agree. And the best thing with podcasts is how personable you can make it for all your listeners. It's regardless of what guests you have, there's somebody that's going to take something away from your podcast and be like, that really resonated with me, and it sticks with them for the rest of their life. And that's why I feel podcasts are such a great tool for so many others, and starting to see it a lot more. In this community of people going to podcasts, because it's easier to have this kind of conversation when you're hearing it from somebody's voice, opposed to seeing it on a blog or seeing it on a Instagram feed, like you said. So it's really cool to see even somebody like yourself who's a therapist branch out into the podcasting world, because I feel more therapists and more mental health advocates would benefit if they would go this route, or even go TikTok, Instagram, whatever it is, because there's that audience is there.
Yeah. And we have to meet people where they are.
Right.
And, I'm not really, I don't know a lot of the intricacies of social media. It baffles me on a good day. So I just really feel it is a powerful tool. I'm still learning so much about how to use it and how to use it effectively and how to navigate putting myself out there in such a vulnerable public way. That's new and tricky for me. Like when people make unkind comments, I'm just like crushed. I'm like, how could you say that mean thing to me? You don't even know me, and I'm just trying to help you.
Yeah.
But people, to that end, people are hurting and too. And so it's natural and normal to understand that sometimes, people respond from the level of healing that they have. And if they're in a really low place, everything is going to look dark. Even someone who's trying to offer help is going to not be perceived like that.
Right.
So I try not to take anything personally if there's ever anything negative, but that's something that is new for me too, is just being um so, because it's not my nature to be anything other than who I am.
Yeah.
And so you're going to get flaws and all and warts and all, and I'm pretty open about my own journey. And some people may find that like, wow, you're sharing too much. But I also think like it gives people permission to
Yeah.
say, wow, you too. And I remember someone commented on one of my posts about shame, about how it's this daily work. And I said, it's daily work for me too. And she was kind of, she was like, I'm so surprised to hear you say that. I'm like, we're all every day, getting up, trying to put one foot in front of the other. And whether I'm a therapist and I know some things, or you are someone who's looking for more tools, like we're all doing the same work, and I'm going to do the same work you're doing. And I'm not going to tell you to journal if I don't. I'm not going to tell you to move your body every day if I don't. I'm not going to tell you the importance of weightlifting and strength training if I don't do that myself. And I'm not going to tell you to eat these things from the garden if I'm not actively doing that. Like I kind of walk the walk and talk the talk, because people can see through that too. Like, if you're fake, people are going to see that. And if you're honest and you're just trying to do good, I think people are going to see that too. I hope, you know.
And I had a guest on here. I think it was just right before summer, and she's a really big men's mental health advocate. And it's she gets attacked on a daily. She has 600,000, maybe close to 1 million followers before she kind of threw the towel in because it was getting overwhelming. But you said something about being 100% yourself when you're doing this kind of work, because if you fake it, people can see right through that. But
Mhm.
in the same breath, though, even being 100% yourself isn't going to be enough for everybody.
Never.
And that's something that people like you and I have to accept, that we're not going to be enough for everybody. um
Absolutely. And protect your energy.
yeah,
Like I've learned to, um, when I was first learning how to use social media, I would go on a lot because I was trying to learn what to do. Like I didn't know what to do. And I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know, and I still, it's always you're learning and growing, but um I consumed more, and that was not good for me. And so now I go on to post my stuff, and I'll look around a little bit, but I try to keep my lens really tight, because I don't want to be go down a rabbit hole or a wormhole with negativity. And I just really try to keep everything really positive. But you're right. Like some people are going to say, right on, rock on, you're doing awesome. And some people are like, I don't know what you're doing here. Like you're always going to have critics, and people are not going to be able to, you're never going to be enough for everybody. That's so perfectly stated.
yeah,
And that's
and
okay.
yeah, it's that rabbit hole definitely goes deep in negativity, and it's better to set those boundaries for yourself, especially when it comes to social media, because it's the wild wild west. Unfortunately, it's there are no limits to what people will say to you, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you know what I've noticed? I didn't even know this was a thing, but you can actually create it so that people can't reply back to you. Like I didn't know that. I didn't know that was a thing.
Right.
And I had this one person comment that she was in need of help. Like, and I wrote this long thing about how I could try this and try that. And then it was like, this person can't receive comments. And I'm like, well, wait a second. Like, you're asking for help, and now I look like an awful person because I'm not responding to you, but I can't.
Right.
I didn't even know that was a thing. And it's funny because the people who generally will say the meanest things are the people who have that filter turned on, so you can't comment back.
Right.
I'm like, wait, that's not fair. You can't drop a bomb and run out of
Yeah.
the room.
um So do your therapy sessions ever blend into any of the other programs that you offer, like for instance, your wellness coaching, or the holistic healing? Do you ever have them blend together, or are they just all their separate entities?
So they should be separate because they're legally, the therapy is different than coaching, and there's a real distinction. And it's hard because also in this space there's a lot of people who are like wellness coaches, and I don't know what that means. What does that mean? And so it's hard for me to sometimes put that title because it's blurry to the general consumer. Is you're a coach. Well, anybody can be a coach. Like that's just a generic title. So that's tricky because obviously I'm going to carry my training into my coaching. And there's no way that I can just shut that off and have it be something completely separate. So if it will naturally have some of the similar elements, but I have to be careful because, you know, if you're not one of my patients, then I'm not going to put on my therapy hat and do, you know, I'm not going to go way deep. If
Right.
you're a coaching client, it's going to be a little bit less intense, but I'm going to give you the tools for you to take that journey on your own.
Right.
Like, you know, for you to be the healer in your own life.
Right.
So I do have some limits because my therapy license is for the state I live in, practice in, but other countries, and in the coaching, it's a little bit more gray. And so you can absolutely do psychoeducation and coaching and help people with all sorts of things, and it still fall under that coaching umbrella as opposed to like the therapy
Mm,
hat.
right.
So part of what I try to define it as psychoeducation, and how I would be like if I went and did a seminar for a hospital or a group. You know, there's certain information that's generic that can help anybody move the dial.
Right.
So, you know, it's a blend.
Yeah. So I ask every one of my guests this question, and being how insightful that you have been through this podcast, I'm genuinely curious to hear your answer on this because I know it's gonna be a good one. If you could change anything in the mental health community, what would it be?
Hmm. I think it would be that it is way more about our physical health than anything else. There is a there is this separation of mental health and physical health. And even saying the mental health community, we are pigeonholing it and we are causing it to be something other than what is health. So to me, mental health is health.
Right.
No different than physical health is health. So I wish we would, in some aspects, not only change the term, but change the way we approach it. Mental health should be approached, in my opinion, from a biological perspective and understanding that the mind and the body are in service to each other. And in order to heal the mind, we absolutely 100% have to go through the body.
Right. Yeah, and that's completely fair. I never thought of it as pigeonholing until you put it like that, but it makes 100% sense because, like you said, mental health is health, and without one, you can't have the other. Um, so yeah, I definitely agree. I wish it was talked about hand in hand like that, and I'm definitely going to do better about phrasing about phrasing it.
No, well,
Um,
that wasn't a slam. That was just like
yeah,
it's a great question.
yeah,
And so, you know, it's a great question. And there are lots of things I think we should change. You know, just having conversation is the biggest thing, is talking about it, but talking about it in the light that it's not separate from our physical bodies. And, you know, 90+% of the neurotransmitters our brain needs to function in a healthy way, our gut makes.
right,
So if we aren't looking at nutrition, we are going to miss a big chunk of what it is to feel better mentally.
right. Um, So at the end of every podcast, I like to read a quote that has to do with either the guest that I'm speaking to or just the related subject that we happen to be covering. Before I read mine, do you have any that I know you read one of your mantras earlier in the podcast, but do you have any quotes that you live by or any quotes that you want to share with the listeners?
So, one of my favorites, and when I was in college, I got the privilege of being what was part of the Great Books program. There's only a few colleges in the country that offer the Great Books program, and it's basically Socrates up to postmodernism. And you, you know, instead of taking like a general ed math class, you read mathematicians' original works. Like it's just a different approach, but it's very much literature based. And I loved that. And I had all these quotes all over my dorm room wall from Socrates and Plato and just all these great philosophers. And during one of those semesters, I had to read the mathematician Blaise Pascal. And I thought, this is going to be poke my eyes out, boring. Who wants to read original documents from a mathematician? And this quote has stuck with me forever, and it's my favorite quote. And it is by Blaise Pascal. And it is, "The heart has a reason of which the mind knows nothing."
Wow. Wow, that's a really good one.
It's a great one. And I, being a lover of wisdom, being biology and chemistry, very hard sciences, it has taken me most of my adult life to realize that it's really the heart which should be leading my life. And the decisions that guide me are heartfelt ones. And learning how to live a more heart-centered life has been the work of my adulthood. And so that quote just reinforces that there's a wisdom in our heart that transcends logic, and that if we can live our life more from that space, I think we would just do better things in this world.
Love that. I definitely agree on that sentiment, because it's better to react on how your heart feels opposed to what your emotions feel like. So I love that. I think very powerful.
It
Um,
is.
so I found one from LR Nost. I hope I'm not butchering that name. And it's tell your story, shout it, write it, whisper it if you have to, but tell it. Some won't understand it, some will outright reject it, but many will thank you for it. And then the most magical thing will happen. One by one, voices will start whispering, "Me too," and your tribe will gather, and you'll never feel alone again.
That's awesome.
It went right with our conversation earlier. And when I found it before we started recording, and I heard when we started talking about the telling your story thing, I'm like, this one is so good.
It's perfect. There's
Yeah,
no coincidences.
absolutely agreed. Before we wrap up today's podcast, where can our listeners find you on socials?
Um, Soul via soul. So, that's sometimes people are like, soul via what? Which what? And so I'm like, oh my gosh. So, you can also just put in the word Jada. That's a little bit less common. So, if you typed in Jada on Instagram, you'll see Soul via Soul will pop up. My other one does too, but I don't do anything with those other accounts. But that's where you can find me on Instagram. I think I'm Soul via Soul on TikTok, which is, again, I'm relatively new over there, so that's just fun. And then of course my website, soulviasoul.com. You can find more information, and then my podcast is on Spotify and Apple. And I have a YouTube channel too. So all of my podcasts fly up to my YouTube. So sometimes people like to put a face with a voice. Some people
Right.
don't. They're like, I don't care what you look like. I just want to listen.
Right.
So
Well,
that's
thank
where
you.
people can find me if they
Awesome.
are so inclined.
Well, thank you so much for being on today's podcast, Jada. I greatly appreciate you.
I appreciate you reaching out. I loved it. And please, let's do this again. This was pretty awesome.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, thank you guys again for all of your support. And as always, be gentle with yourselves. Until next time, take care.